Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras. And coming up in today's newscast, escalations between Israelis and Palestinians still rising despite Israel's caving into demands in East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the first Palestinian elections in over 15 years may be stalled again. Palestinian Authority President Abbas blaming Israel, while other Palestinian factions blame Abbas. Then finally, forget talking to babies, they'll learn to speak eventually. I want to talk to whales. And thanks in part to Israeli researchers, that dream may soon be a reality. Israel responding in full force to the recent escalations of violence in Gaza and in Jerusalem. Defense authorities reporting that the Security Cabinet has approved of substantial military retaliation should rockets and terror attacks persist. Following consecutive and ongoing days of violence, including at least 36 rockets, riots, and explosions along the border with Gaza, the IDF has presented Israel's Security Cabinet with various operational scenarios targeting the Hamas terror group in Gaza, the governing authority in the Strip. And the Security Cabinet has now approved of a substantial Air Force attack should a single additional rocket be launched at Israeli territory. Additional ground forces, however, have yet to be deployed to the area. In any case, Israeli defense heads, including Defense Minister Benny Gantz, saying that the ball is now in Hamas's court. Gantz even meeting with UN Special Coordinator to the Middle East peace process, Tor Weisenland, reportedly expressing the urgency of the immediate cessation of violence from Gaza, as well as Israel's unyielding commitment to protecting its citizens and sovereignty. And Gantz adding that the closure of Gaza's fishing zone earlier in the week is the last non-military response that can be expected. Weisenland, for his part, then set to meet with Egyptian officials in order to relay the message to Hamas, as well as with officials in Amman, Jordan, to discuss the ongoing situation in Jerusalem. And this as sections of Jerusalem similarly burning under a growing trend of violence directed at Jewish bystanders, as well as ongoing clashes with Israeli police and pro-Israeli groups. The uprising is even being coined as the TikTok Intifada, as thousands of young Muslims fill the streets of East Jerusalem chanting to kill all the Jews, as well as to film themselves on social media attacking Jews in public. And fringe ultra-nationalist Jewish groups, for their part, retaliating with scattered clashes of their own, including chants of death to Arabs. The clashes first began to really kick off around the start of Ramadan, when Israel police put up barriers near the Damascus Gate and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in order to reduce holiday crowds, particularly in light of the coronavirus. Yet even after the barriers were removed in efforts to appease demands of the protesters, pockets of violence continue. Police reportedly arresting at least 6 Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem for waving Palestinian flags, as well as for assaulting and injuring 2 female officers outside the old city's Damascus Gate. Meantime, they're also extending the remands of a Jewish minor and an adult who had been arrested Sunday for attacking a pair of Arab sanitation workers. Now, on another note, I would also like to add again, unequivocally, I condemn any and all violence carried out in Israel, both anti-Arab or anti-Muslim violence, as well as anti-Jewish and anti-Israel violence. It's disgusting, it's divisive, and it only serves to escalate the tensions. The Israelis of all backgrounds that I know and believe in are better than that. Now, joining me with more on the ongoing clashes, I'm joined by Dr. Michael Barak, senior researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center for Counterterrorism. Dr. Barak, thank you so much for being with us. Now, starting with the so-called TikTok Intifada, experts are saying that while the phenomenon of using social media to spread violence and hate has been going on for years, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What's coming on the horizon?
So as you mentioned, this phenomena is not new. We saw it in 2015, 2016, how Hamas used the social media network in order to disseminate hate speech and to encourage Palestinians to stab Jews. This is what was called the Intifada of the knives. And ISIS and other also jihadists, other terrorists are using these social media networks for their own goals. This is not something new. TikTok is only, as I said, it's a new platform. It was established in 2016 and it became very popular among the young people, especially from 10 years old to 20 years old. When someone is uploading his video to this platform, Hamas especially when it relates to violence and hate speech, Hamas is taking this video and disseminate it in its own accounts. For example, in Twitter, Facebook, other platforms. Facebook is more problematic, and then it's become viral, and then it's very difficult to stop it.
So what can be done to address this issue and to stem the abuse of these platforms? Because, as I'm sure you know, TikTok alone has billions of users.
Right. So let's remember ISIS phenomena when it uses social media networks to disseminate this violence and hate speech. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, they managed to establish in 2017 the Global Internet Forum to counter terrorism. What does it mean? It's a cooperation between those technological companies to academia, to the civilian society, and with government in order to fight this hate speech in these platforms of social media networks. Now, TikTok has not joined to this organization. I think it's very urgent that TikTok will join to this organization and make sure to remove this hate speech from its platform. So TikTok is far behind, and I think this is because of this vacuum. Also, other radicals are using it. For example, neo-Nazis, and radical right wing in order to disseminate hate speech.
All right. Well, as you said, we can only hope that TikTok and other social media platforms that exist or are coming up will do their best to clamp down on this rise of terror. Thank you again so much, Dr. Barak.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in related news, as Israeli-Palestinian tensions are rising and defense officials discuss new military measures, many in Israel are calling on authorities to first take care of the Israeli soldiers and citizens seemingly forgotten in high-level talks. That is, the return of Israelis held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza now for nearly 7 years, including the bodies of Lieutenant Hadar Golden, Staff Sergeant Oron Shaul, and then Avira Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed. And I spoke with Lieutenant Golden's mother, Leah Golden, earlier today on this exact topic. Take a look.
I'm not going to get into in any way to the political mess of Israel, but specifically talking about Operation Protective Edge on August 1st, 2014, it was specifically an act of the American administration to impose ceasefire where everybody knew that the Hamas is violating any agreement. So, in fact, that's what happened. 2 hours after ceasefire started, Hamas took advantage, knowing the Israeli soldiers' protocol is not to shoot, and simply killed 3 of them and kidnapped Hadar into the underground terror tunnels. And since then, we've been approaching the American administration to help rectify this situation, as they have leverage on the Hamas, they have leverage on the Arabic countries, and especially now, having all the initiatives in our region to improve the situation in our region with all the agreements that almost all the Arab countries are involved. This is the time where the Americans should bring my son back to rectify what they really initiated. Now, this is not just because I say so. It's because the humanitarian international law says so, and it's because the UN resolution 2474 from June 2019 says that with any agreement, after an armed conflict, the ones that initiate the agreement are responsible to return the missing persons and the dead one as a confidence-building step. Talking about confidence-building steps, it's relevant now to all sides that are now involved in all the discussions around us.
All right, now a special thanks again to Leah Golden for speaking with me on this devastating issue. We're all praying, of course, for Israel to do everything in its power to return its missing citizens from the clutches of Hamas. And if you'd like to see the rest of this discussion that I had with Mrs. Golden, you can catch it on ILTV's Insider, which is broadcast both on Facebook, YouTube, and ILTV.tv. In other news, it's largely believed that the recent escalations in Palestinian violence, particularly by Fatah, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hamas, coming ahead of the scheduled Palestinian elections, each rival group apparently trying to outdo the other in the resistance against Israel before the vote, the first national vote in the PA in 15 years. But Israel's pending retaliations aside, the violent virtue signaling may all be for naught anyway, as the elections themselves may soon be indefinitely postponed again. Voting rules regarding East Jerusalem being the justification for the postponement, as explained by PA President and Fatah head Mahmoud Abbas. Abbas pressuring the EU to in turn pressure Israel into allowing East Jerusalem Palestinians to participate in the vote, while Israel, for its part, is remaining silent on whether or not they'll allow a Palestinian election to be held, even in part, within Israel's borders. All this considered, though, even Palestinian authorities are doubtful that Israel has anything to do with Abbas's decision to delay elections. Anonymous Palestinian sources instead accusing Abbas himself of being fearful of political defeat. In any case, Palestinian political leaders are set to discuss their final decision later this week. Now, amidst the noise of the recent clashes with Palestinians, another crisis is going mostly under the radar. Dozens of members of the African Hebrew Israelites, believing to be descendants of an ancient Israelite tribe, now facing deportation. The Interior Ministry reportedly giving upwards of 46 families just 2 months to leave the country despite having permanent residency status. Joining me now with more, though, is Hebrew Israelite Community Representative Ashriel Moore. Ashriel, thank you so much for being with us. Now, you just came out of a meeting, I understand, with the Minister of Interior. What was discussed in the meeting, and were there any developments?
Well, first of all, good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me, and good afternoon to all of our viewing audience. Just a bit of accuracy. We were not meeting with the Ministry of Interior. We were meeting with the Deputy Minister of Internal Security, who's a personal friend of the communities and who's looking forward to assisting us. He's from the Ethiopian community, Beta Israel. And what we discussed, very simply, just so you can have a general picture, you see, we have approximately 135 people right now who have upward of about 50 days now to be out of the country. Now, when we look at these people, we're considering you have those who've been in Israel since 1969, 1970. You have children and second and third generation of their children who've been born in Israel who don't have any legal status in any other country in the world. You have those who have matriculated through the systems of Israel, most notably the military, and their either family members or parents are up for deportation. There's a situation here that we've tried to settle with the Ministry of Interior, and we've tried to settle it for the last 53 years. But somehow, some way, we've always run into stumbling blocks where they would just not allow us to do so. And this time around was a bit stranger because they gave us a feeling that they actually wanted to settle the cases. And we were in this situation with them for approximately a year now, since August of last year. They requested that we provide to them a listing of the those who are up for not deportation, but those who do not have any legal status here in Israel right now, and they'll settle the cases. But guess what they received in turn? They received a deportation note letting them know that they have up to 60 days to be out of the country.
So what changed? How is it possible to remove this residency status in cases such as this? And why, again, why just these 46 families?
You see, it's not just the 46 families. In 2014, when then Minister of Interior Gideon Saar came to Dimona to visit us, he wanted to settle all of the cases because those who immigrated to Israel in 1969, they immigrated under the law of return. But the law of return, and they received legal citizenship, not status just, legal citizenship. But the law of return changed in 1970, and then that law was no more relevant for us. So those who had citizenship, their citizenship was revoked, first of all, and then we began the legal battle. Now, in 2014, Gideon Saar wanted to put a close to this situation once and for all, and he began the process, actually began to settle cases, but he just didn't get around to everybody because he was just in office for a year and a half. And when Aryeh Deri returned to the office, everything that Gideon Saar had begun, he absolutely annihilated. And the process for deportation, I think, actually started then in 2015 when they simply just drug the cases out up until 2020 when they allowed us once again to come to speak to them. And then they gave the impression that they were willing to now settle everything once and for all. And then we are now served deportation notes.
So my final question to you is, do you think that this is a technical issue of some sort, or do you think there's maybe more political or even religious motivations behind these decisions? And might it even have anything to do with the smaller held belief amongst the community that the Black Hebrew Israelites are the true descendants as opposed to other white-appearing Jews?
I think it's very simple. You see, we have not came up on these obstacles because we're not part of the whole house of Israel. We have not experienced all of these difficulties just because we have our different beliefs in regards to how we should keep the laws of the Bible. We have a very specific feeling about this, and we feel that we're just not wanted here in Israel. The color of our skin plays a very big part in it, obviously, because we're not the only community here in Israel who's experiencing such difficulties. Even the Ethiopian community is experiencing their own difficulties in their own way. The policies of immigration in Israel says, obviously, that those who were born in Israel and have no other status in any other country is eligible for citizenship. And in 2002, Ariel Sharon reassured the then congressman that that everybody who was born in Israel would actually receive citizenship. But obviously that has not happened. So it's been a continual process of trying to actually uproot us from Israel. And I think we've reached a peak at this moment. And I'm happy that it's catching the kind of attention that it's catching, because it has to come to an end.
All right, well, I'm happy to be a part of it, and I wish you the best in this battle with the government. Ashriel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Meanwhile, in COVID-related news, the United States Level 4 travel warning against Israel being reduced just days after being raised, indicating an odd back and forth from the State Department. Earlier listed as Level 3, aka reconsider travel, the travel advisory for Israel was raised to a Level 4, or do not travel rating, along with the UK, Canada, France, Mexico, and Germany, among others. It was only after skeptics pointed out that Israel's COVID rates were plummeting, however, due to its vaccination campaign, that the State Department backtracked. That said, officials on the Travel Advisory Board then still requalified their assessments, saying that Americans in Israel should still exercise increased caution due to terrorism and civil unrest. All right, now, it's ancient yet modern, poetic and evolving. It is the language of both the Holy Land as well as Holy Scriptures. And I'm speaking, of course, about Hebrew, one of the oldest tongues still in common use today. And Ulpan Or wants to help you learn it through their unique language program, as opposed to a stuffy book or a memorization structure. But here to tell us all about it are the CEOs and founders of Ulpan Or themselves, Yoel and Orly Ganor. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Shalom, Aaron.
Orly, I want to start with you. Tell us about this program, because we talked about how this is a unique structure.
Right. So actually, the best way to study a language, any language, is the natural way. What do I mean? Did you ever think of the fact that we all studied a language at a certain time in life? We're all geniuses. How did we do that? We did it in a natural way. What happens today is when you approach studying a language, an adult approaches this subject, he does it in an academic way, with books, an app, and teacher. But we at Ulpan Or, we developed a system that actually imitates the natural way.
So as if you were raising them in that language. So Yoel, yeah, I mean, what are some of the unique methods that Ulpan Or uses?
Okay, I would say that we have three main pillars, and we call them PPT, meaning the first P stands for psychology, second one for pedagogy, and the T stands for technology and also for teachers. So what do I mean by that? We know that many people have this anxiety of studying languages, and we sort of were able to make them approach this subject of studying a language with positive psychology, affirmations, and many other tricks that we do with people. Then pedagogy. We have unique way of addressing our materials using special books. We have them online, our ebooks. They're stuffed with video clips. They're stuffed with audio recordings and very, very interesting text, up-to-date text. Okay? And of course, technology makes all our materials very accessible to anybody, even to 90-year-old people, okay, nowadays, especially during the corona.
Right. During the corona, we saw that our elderly students enjoyed studying Hebrew at home, thinking they are here in Israel and developing their Hebrew through our material.
Yeah, so can you give us some more examples of the methods and maybe some of the results that you've seen?
Okay, I'll tell you, there's an interesting anecdote that we had. A bunch of girls, after graduating from high school, having a high 12-year education in Hebrew, okay, they came to Israel and they were not able to ask for directions in Jerusalem in Hebrew. So their parents pushed them, these girls, to our Ulpan, and in 2 weeks they came out fluent in Hebrew. So the parents told us, why don't you introduce your methodology and your curriculum to schools in America and elsewhere in the world? And that's what we did. Okay, so
wow. So you're using your techniques in other languages or mostly just Hebrew still?
It's Hebrew right now, okay, but we're present currently in more than 90 schools, universities, from the United States to Australia, also Jewish centers and communities.
And the recent thing is the IDF, the Israeli army. They adopted our system, and for 2 years already, we are teaching the soldiers in our system successfully.
That is incredible. All right, so my last question for you, unfortunately, and we touched on this a little bit, there's this embarrassment factor when people are learning a new language.
Right.
They don't want to sound stupid, they don't want to make mistakes. So how does Ulpan O eliminate that?
So what we did is a kind of a trick. We use the language from the first lesson. Our students are equipped with all they need in order to speak immediately. If they study in our branches in Jerusalem, they go outside and they use the language knowing how to use it. And any other way is through the...
Okay, Aaron, do you know how to say manager in Hebrew?
Manager, yeah.
Okay, it's menahel, okay, in Hebrew. So, for instance, for that matter, instead of being embarrassed but not being able to pronounce menahel in Hebrew, we help our students to remember it. How? For instance, if they associate that menahel, a man from hell, okay? Manager. So they easily remember that, and they're not afraid to say menahel.
That is the best mnemonic device ever, as for manager. All right, well, I can't tell you how excited I am to hear about this, because it's an incredible program, and people need it. People need, especially olim, new immigrants to any new place. It's a very important thing to learn the language. Orly, Yoel, thank you so much for coming with us. And everybody watching at home, please learn more. It's Ulpan O, and check it out for yourselves.
And we welcome everybody to study with us online or in person.
All right, finally, speaking of learning new languages, have you ever wanted to learn what animals were saying to one another? Well, such an opportunity may not be so far-fetched anymore, thanks to the ongoing efforts of SETI, the Cetacean Translation Initiative. And 5 Israelis have now been invited to join in on the project. As part of TED's audacious project, SETI is working to create a blueprint of other animals' language, potentially even paving the way for humans to communicate with these creatures. And first on the list, giant sperm whales, which have the largest brains on the planet. So how do they plan to do it, though? Well, using advanced linguistic and machine learning technology, the scientists of SETI hope to break down the distinct varying frequencies of sounds that the whales produce when in each other's company. And ideally, they'll eventually even be able to understand and reproduce these sounds in the form of an authentic language. Finally, that said, we're likely still a long way off from clicking out of a conversation with whales, but you can learn more at theaudaciousproject.org. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Hannah Rifkin.
Good evening. Now tonight and tomorrow, Israel's calling for clear skies, and lows this evening will rest between 11 and 14 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, high temperatures expecting to get into the 20s. We're looking at a slow rise in temperatures leading up to the weekend, so stay tuned for more on that. And back to the studio.
And now, of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Well, we must be in Haifa because I see a wild boar roaming the streets. Oh, wow. Oh, no. This is like my nightmare. This is why, if you can, find indoor parking. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.24 shekels to the American dollar and 2.61 shekels to the Canadian dollar. Finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.